bring John McMullen in on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline and get his take on what's happening with the Birds as they get ready for the Jets. And a lot of it, John, has to do with some injuries and stuff going on in-house. And I guess the first thing that Doug Peterson addressed today was Sidney Jones' status and the cornerbacks and where the team stands. Did we get any update on if Sidney will play and what that secondary might look like on Sunday?
Well, there is a chance. He was listed as limited today on the injury report. So Sidney's doing some work, and as we said, he's the closest and really the only possibility. I mean, Ronald Darby's not going to play. Avonte Maddox isn't going to play. So you understand that, and the goal is really if Sidney can get out there to team him up with Rasul Douglas and probably have Orlando Scandrick play the nickel and slot instead of Avonte. But I also think you got to be a little maybe strategical about it and say it is the New York Jets and Sam Darnold probably isn't going to play. And even if he does play, it's not going to be 100% or near 100%. So maybe this is one where you kind of bite the bullet and say we can probably get through this with Mike Gill, Ryan Rothstein, Jeff Mosher at corner if Luke Falk is out there. So maybe that's the way they go about it.
I've got a bad wheel right now.
So do I.
Yeah, that's true.
So do I. I got a lower body injury, as Doug would say.
Wow. How did that occur?
That occurs when you drop a box of stuff in the garage on your foot.
Oh,
I'm going lower body.
Lower body. All right. So, it looks like, and I was going to ask that, like, this is a week where, because, like, Scandrick was here. They didn't bring him back right after week one. It took a couple of weeks. It took a couple of injuries. I wanted to see what you saw from Scandrick in the preseason. I mean, is this guy has anything left in the tank?
Well, I think you look more back towards what he did in Kansas City. Not a lot great. I think he's still a capable NFL player. He's going to get exposed at times the more he plays. So I think it's one of those things where you look at this week, as I said, and said, yeah, we can probably get through this game with Orlando Scandrick. Mm-hmm. But if you have him out there consistently, you're probably going to be in trouble. And the fact that they released him and nobody picked him up for 4 weeks, that kind of tells you what you need to know.
Yeah, now I know, I guess yesterday or the day before, we didn't really touch on this much, but the Cyprian to the Falcons for a linebacker, Duke Riley. Cyprian was a guy who played safety, a secondary guy. Now, he got picked on a little bit, but, I was assuming that they must have just been completely disenchanted with what he brought to them. And what does Duke Riley add for them?
No, I don't think the Eagles were disenchanted at all. In fact, I think they made a prudent decision by keeping Jonathan around. They knew they were deep at the position. He wasn't going to play very much, but there's some value there if he could prove he was healthy coming off an ACL tear. And I think you saw that the Falcons had some serious safety issues, injury concerns. From their standpoint, they needed a body. And all of a sudden the Eagles had it, and they're able to get something out of it. So I think when you look at it from that standpoint, it is obviously a good decision. And the fact you just don't release him because you didn't have a spot for him. Typically, you're not going to keep 5 safeties. Now, in Green Bay, it actually worked out because he had to play because of all the corner injuries. And sometimes things roll your way. And as you mentioned, it's difficult when you're playing that many safeties who are being covering receivers, and Aaron Rodgers is throwing the football. It's probably not going to look pretty, and it didn't look pretty, but they got out with the win. So, and they needed a linebacker, and they needed another special teams player, and that's kind of what Duke Riley is.
John, is it only going to be 3 guys active at the corner/secondary positions for the Jets game on Sunday?
I would think they would bring somebody up, but it's hard. It's because you have to carry these spots, and these guys are all short-term injuries, and so you can't put them on injured reserve. If you put them on injured reserve, they got to be out 8 weeks, and that's even if you have the room to use one of your two designated returns. They already have that earmarked for Crevon LeBlanc, for instance. So you got to be careful from that standpoint. And all of a sudden you run out of spaces because you need 46 guys to play, and that's probably not enough. Most coaches will tell you. So you do have to be careful. And I would think they would bring up somebody from the practice squad. They just signed 2 corners to the practice squad that have some experience, as opposed to somebody like Ajeen Harris, who was released from the practice squad, didn't have any experience. So maybe those guys would be closer to playing, but you got to figure out how to fit them on that game day roster, who you release, who can you get through waivers, who can you get back to the practice squad. So all that comes into it. I will say typically you're not going to go into an NFL game with 3 healthy corners, but typically the NFL quarterback you're facing is a lot more dangerous than Luke Falk. So maybe you feel like you can get away with it.
How can the Jets realistically have success, specifically against the Eagles defense? Because it's just quiet this week, John. You know, the Packers matchup was huge, unbelievable win, and now it's like, oh, we have the Jets with extra days to rest, and with everything going on, I just feel like it's being overlooked.
Well, I think it is, because a lot of people are taking it for granted, and I mean, for good reason. I think the most exciting part will be seeing Joe Douglas, maybe, for us who cover the team. I mean, they're just a bad football team, and they're a bad football team with injuries at bad positions, with a bad coach. You know, normally you look at an opponent and you can take something and say, okay, this is good. We have to be concerned about this. Le'Veon Bell is a great player, but they can't throw the football. I think they found the end zone once, so they're so one-dimensional. He's not involved. C.J. Mosley's been hurt. Quinnen Williams is really talented, so you could point at that front 7, I guess. But you got a coach who's not going to mask deficiencies. It's just, as usual, it's a bad situation in North Jersey.
John McMullen, football at 4 at JF McMullen. Give him a follow on Twitter. What about Deshaun Jackson? Any expectations for him? I know Doug was a little vague today. He said he's still rehabbing, but it sounds as if my ears are perking the right way, that we should not expect Deshaun out there.
No, yeah, I would think you're right, and I said that yesterday. Watch the injury report on Wednesday, and that'll tell you all you need to know, and the fact that he wasn't practicing.
Did not participate.
Yes, did not participate. Doug said still rehabbing. That tells you, it's similar to what I said at the beginning of the conversation, they don't feel they need him for this game. They feel they can buy an extra week, and you can expect to see Deshaun in Minnesota in week 6. I think that's more strategy than anything else. If this were a different opponent, they probably would try to get him out there a little bit more quickly. But I got to be honest. I think they're going into this week. I always say you got to be careful of Adams, but this is close going to get in the NFL.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are on this. Ellis knee, Jackson Jernigan foot, Kelsey not injury related, Avonte Maddox concussion neck, and obviously he had that ugly collision the other night, and then limited today was Barnett groin and Sidney Jones hamstring. That's the official injury report for Wednesday, by the way. And John McMullen, you look at Barnett with the groin and Jones with the hamstring. They're both limited. Do you feel that it's just limited, but they both would play? I mean, is Barnett a possibility of being out?
I don't think so. I mean, he's been struggling with some issues, and it's been most weeks has been limited at the start at least, and then he ramps it up to get ready for game day. So I would expect him to play. So it's a little bit different for everybody, but I do think this is more of a, I don't want to call it a preseason environment, but they're gonna err on the side of caution. And if there is iffy, if it's a true questionable situation where it's 50-50, this guy's going to play, this guy's not going to play, they're probably not going to play him because they'd rather have him for the road game in Minnesota.
Yeah, and you mentioned that Did they do this, though, against the Lions? Like, say, we could probably beat the Lions without some guys?
No, absolutely not. That's what I mean. The Lions,
okay,
even with their history, even with the fact that they've struggled typically, and maybe they have a few outlier years where they make a run toward a wild card or even won a division title there. They had one good year with Jim Schwartz, for instance, a couple of good years with Jim Caldwell. They always have those spike years, and that's the typical bad team in the NFL, and I put bad in quotations. They might not be consistent success, but there's enough good players that if you don't show up and bring your A game, they can beat you. And the Eagles found that out. They beat them. And all of a sudden, they start to get confidence. And the next week, they almost beat Kansas City, which is universally regarded as one of the top 2 or 3 teams in this league. So that's your typical, and again, I put it in quotations, bad NFL team. In normal years, those teams can always get up on a particular week and beat you, especially early in the season when things haven't started to go off the rails. This Jets team, like I said, what are you going to lean on? What are you going to point to? I mean, I guess you could say Le'Veon Bell's talented enough to run for 200 yards, but when you have no passing attack whatsoever, all you got to do is put 8 in the box, and it doesn't matter if you're Superman. You're not going to get 200 yards. So I just don't see what they can point to make this a football game.
A big win, and in Lambeau Field, John, on a Thursday, a borderline must-win game. And now that the dust has settled a little bit, and we talk about how it's the Jets and maybe they're overlooking it a little bit, fans, media, potentially the team. You're around the team all the time. Is there an energy in the locker room? Like, how can you, describe the pulse of this team right now after that win and now having to prepare for a dumpster fire?
Well, I think that's one of the strengths of this team is the fact that it's a veteran group and the veteran leadership particularly has been through so much that they kind of see both sides of the spectrum. So when you see it's 1-2 and you're going into Green Bay and everybody's panicking against the 3-0 Packers, they're very calm. And on the other end of that spectrum, when you win that game, as many of us predicted they would, and you're playing a team like the Jets, and it's a logical letdown when you have another good team the following week on the road. Typically, you say, okay, this might be a trap game, but they handle that very well as in the same kind of vein. So I don't think you have to worry about that kind of stuff as much as maybe the average NFL team does. It's not to say human nature doesn't come into effect. I mean, that's what it is. It's this. They're the same as us. They look at this and they say, this team's got nothing. And yeah, so it might be ugly a little bit at the start of the game. Who knows? And they might have a late wake-up call, so to speak. But I do think it's a lot like Washington in many ways in week 1. Just not enough talent, and eventually the talent's going to win out.
Yeah, Washington's really bad. More on them coming up. Sports Bash Live, football at 4, John McMullen. So they ran the ball with a lot of success against Green Bay. So we kind of found that Green Bay does not, defend the run. If this is a game, and I want to say, like, hey, your opponent, you want to work on something, but what do you think Doug would like to see his team come out and do offensively against this Jets defense? Because the Jets defense, to be fair, they're not awful. The Jets defense, they put up a fight in the first half against Cleveland. I mean, they have been competitive defensively. Their problem is they're just abysmal offensively, correct?
Yeah, no question. I think they've scored 1 touchdown. That's the far bigger issue, and the fact that obviously you're down to your third quarterback most likely as well. Yeah, I mean, offense is the biggest issue, and they're talented. I mean, again, guys have been injured, especially in that front 7. So maybe if they were full strength, it would be a little bit more of a concern. I guess coming off the Green Bay game, it's a little bit of a bounce back effect, and you do point to 160 yards passing, and as exciting as everyone gets about the running game, part of that is just the personality of the game. The DNA of this offense is throwing the football. So I do think they want to be more successful consistently throwing the football. But part of the issues there have been injuries as well, and the fact that Alshon was just back against Green Bay. Sean remains out. So they want to continue to get sharper offensively. I don't think that's any surprise to anyone. And maybe if you talk about Week 6 and everybody should be back, Deshaun with Alshon, Nelson, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert, both running backs playing with a little bit more confidence, maybe that could be the coming out party. And I think the goal is to sharpen and get ready for that. And not only that, but also a whole series of road games. So that's going to be a very important stretch for the Eagles.
Let's get a couple quick thoughts inside the NFC East. John McMullen, of course, covers the Eagles, covers the NFL. Colt McCoy, Case Keenum, Dwayne Haskins, Jay Gruden said, we don't have a quarterback. Ideally, what happens in Washington this week?
Well, I think there's no real use of throwing the rookie out there, and you kind of saw that. A, he's not ready, and B, even if he was ready, that's a team that's kind of figured out. I just talked about it before. If you have the preference of playing a bad team, you'd rather do it after they figured out they're a bad team and not early in the season. Like the first quarter against the Redskins didn't know how bad they were, and they were out there fighting and clawing. And they looked pretty good, really, the first half. So that's what I mean by that. Now the Redskins kind of understand, okay, we stink. And it's hard to go through this grind. So if I were them, I would just play Colt McCoy. You probably have to go away from Case Keenum, but it doesn't matter. And that's you kind of tell by Jay's response. It doesn't make him look that good when he says something like that. And I think he's checked out, to be honest, because he knows he's on his way out.
Yikes. Bad situation in Washington. Let's go to Dallas. They lost, and obviously they could have lost more than just a game. It looks like Tyron Smith, their talented tackle, obviously might also be gone for the Packer game here. But is this a good matchup for Dallas against Green Bay after watching Philly?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's what Dallas does. They want to get the running game going. They couldn't get the running game going in New Orleans, and that's why they lost the game. And that's why the Saints won it, because they were able to stop Ezekiel Elliott. The Packers, you've seen it. I mean, the Eagles don't have Ezekiel Elliott. I hate to break it to people. Zeke's a cut above anything the Eagles can throw out there running back. And the Cowboys have a good offensive line, as we know. Tyron Smith will hurt, but more so in pass protection than run blocking. So we'll see if they could get the run game going. And when they do, that makes things a lot easier for Dak Prescott in that passing game and Amari Cooper. But, you know, we go all the way back, guys. I remember when we talked about that trade, and Amari Cooper played so well for the Cowboys down the stretch of last season. Well, one of the reasons Oakland traded him because he dropped the football. He's dropping the football again consistently. And I said that's what you're going to have to keep an eye on because he was excited about that new atmosphere, focused, channeled in, and now he's part of that organization. He leads the NFL in drop percentage. So that's kind of one of the things you should have kept an eye on, and it's rearing its ugly head again.
John, Giants, Saquon Barkley not ruled out. I mean, was at practice hopping around today. May not play, but question really is more big team that we should at least take more serious now. I mean, in other words, like, all right, you knew Washington and the Giants coming in were probably going to be – are the Giants now not a gimme? Yeah,
I think that's fair to say. They're no longer a gimme. part of it is, mentioned this yesterday on the show, it's just the juice that the quarterback is giving him, just an energy in that locker room. Saquon's not going to play this week. He hopes to be back for New England. That seems to be a big deal for him from a personal standpoint. I guess a lot of people want to prove themselves. But even that, I mean, Wayne Gallman's a good back, a good running back, and they were able to do some things without Saquon. They're just a much more dangerous team. But I think long term, they're still in rebuilding mode defensively. They just don't have a lot on the defensive side of the football. So I'm not going to overstate it and say that it's a three-way race in the NFC East. But clearly the Giants are finally moving in the right direction, and you can't take them for granted. They're now one of those bad teams I talked about. They might be a bad team, but they're a bad team that can jump up and bite you if you don't bring your A game.
They're still bad defensively, but they at least can hold. They don't go 3 and out all the time, which helps their defense out and makes them more competitive. But it's amazing. For all these years, we heard that it wasn't Eli's fault that the team hadn't been that good.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So many people who, and I understand why, the emotion of it, but they were so steadfast that it wasn't Eli. And as soon as he leaves, he's forgotten.
Voila!
Hey, we got a pretty good quarterback, pretty good rookie quarterback, and it's not.
Although to be
Eli
fair, the people were critical of Daniel Jones too. I mean, not to say that this guy is going to be a Hall of Fame level player, but people were very critical that they made a mistake.
They got the wrong guy from Duke. New York wanted Zion. They got Daniel Jones.
Yeah, well, I argue they made a mistake the year prior, to be honest.
Well, if Jones turns out to be better than Darnold, I guess they end up with Jones and Barkley. So then maybe
it's just a matter of, and who knows, maybe Sam isn't kissing the wrong girl and getting on that with it. But same North Jersey, so it probably works out the same way. But Saquon, look, and it's not an insult, but that's why people get really upset and say,
you've been working with Bruno too long.
Saquon Barkley is extremely talented, but the position, let's be honest, again, you see the difference. Saquon is top 5 talent back in this league, but you can win with Wayne Gallman. You can win with Wayne Gallman and a good quarterback. You can't win with Saquon Barkley and a corpse, as I mentioned earlier in the week.
Yeah.
And the Giants figured that out.
John McMullen, all guests, appear via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Give him a follow on Twitter at JF McMullen. Thanks, pal.
All right. Thank you, guys.